Raising children into successful adults is every parent's goal. The more we learn about child development, the better we understand how crucial those first few years really are.
Normal childhood brain development starts right from the get-go. So an ultimate and a wonderful situation, you'd have adult caregivers, doesn't have to be parents, who are bonding with that child. It's that serve and volley approach in which a child is seeking guidance and an adult in some way affirms it. And that lays down the brain connections and sets off a pathway that allows for really kids, adults to function as a relationship-based society.
Children should be able to function socially well with other children in their play, in their learning. They should have strong bonding with parents, family members. Children should be able to laugh freely, and we want to encourage thinking children. And thinking children come from good nurturing, from an environment free of trauma.
We can get traumatized by anything that is too much, too fast, too soon, or too long, coupled with not enough, something that should have happened that didn't happen.
I knew that the biggest time for a learning experience was from birth to 5. But to see what trauma can do and how it shifts the brain and changes things, and when I learned about that, I was like, whoa, like, that's me.
Whole People, Healing Communities is a TPT Partnerships co-production with CentraCare Health.
Childhood trauma is often experienced at a personal level and can happen to anyone regardless of race, class, gender, religion, or geography. We are only now beginning to understand the impact that adverse childhood experiences have on those who experience them.
My childhood was pretty traumatic. So I don't remember this, but my first sexual assault, I was 4 months old. It was by my father. Physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, rape, and molestation. He had a way of making you feel like you owed him for being born. And he would talk about, well, you know, so what would happen? Like, would you play mommy if I got rid of mommy? You'd love me like mommy does. You'd cook for me. You'd stay with me, right? You're not going to leave me. I'm 2. When the rape started, he would tell me, well, don't worry about going to your mom. She already knows and she don't care. And so that's a scar that I carried for years. And my mom had her own mental health issues. She was sick a lot. He beat the crap out of her all the time too.
I lived with my parents for a little bit, but my mom OD'd in the bathtub and left the bathtub running, so we got taken away. I was taken to Colorado with my black side of my family, and that's where the abuse started as a child. We got hit a lot, like a lot. We got beat a lot, and I distinctly remember trying whatever it was that I could do to make sure that they wouldn't hurt my sisters. I had a lot of sexual abuse as a child, and throughout my teen years, there are 3 different family members, and then different like boyfriends and stuff like that had happened. That was what I think I had more struggle getting over growing up was that, and coming to terms with that and like being okay with myself with it.
When you have toxic stress, cortisol levels are very high. And it's been shown that those cortisol levels actually impede that brain architecture from forming. So even those serve and volley connections, if they're present, cannot be laid down for ongoing concrete connections.
When I was growing up, I didn't have toys. I didn't have an attachment to things, you know what I mean? Because nothing was permanent. There was nothing that was guaranteed. Everything was chaos. And the only things that were permanent were my sisters.
Children are great observers, but poor interpreters. They don't have the language, the vocabulary, experience of life to understand what's happening to them. They just react to it.
Adverse childhood experiences, often referred to by the acronym ACEs, are damaging in multiple ways. There's the actual acute experience of trauma, such as abuse, neglect, losing a parent or family member, or growing up around substance abuse. Then there's the body survival instincts that work to create normalcy in the midst of emergency. But children are ill-equipped to make sense of what's happened to them.
Often they become hypervigilant. They have behavioral issues. They do not socialize well with other children and in learning environments. They are labeled as children with problems, bad children, and they are not. They are reacting to something that is going on in their environment that is toxic.
That famous poem, Children Learn What They Live, which, is so prescient about the ACEs findings, that those early childhood experiences and the kind of environment that we create has a very strong influence lifelong.
I would go through these cycles. Like everything was good for a while and then I'd become all manic and crazy and wreck these relationships and not realize why. Until I learned about ACEs. Once I learned about ACEs, it was, that's why I did that. Because this is how I knew to survive. It was survival mode. Everything that I lived up to until maybe 6 years ago was all survival mode. All the time, 24/7. And unfortunately, because of being in survival mode, I now have health issues. I suffer from fibromyalgia, and they've linked it with trauma and depression. I have PTSD. I have personality disorder. I do not like being in big groups. It makes me really antsy. I have schizophrenic tendencies, but I take meds for all these, and they are it's extremely manageable because of learning these things about myself.
It's a lifelong impact to health. It's a lifelong impact to the academic and achievement gaps. It's profound.
The ACEs study has revealed staggering correlations between adverse childhood experiences and adult health and mortality. Childhood trauma has been linked to a wide range of conditions like heart disease, cancer, obesity, mental illness, substance abuse, and incarceration.
What I see among people is often a disconnect between what happened to them as kids and their current adult life and behavior. And what that results in is very little compassion for themselves.
I try really hard to stay positive. From the abuse that I've had, you have these thoughts of wanting to harm yourself. It's taken a lot of work on myself to get to the point where I wake up every day and I still want to keep going.
If you have had a start in life that involved some of these significant adverse childhood experiences, your journey to health, your journey to wholeness, your journey to well-being is a harder journey.
Trauma experts quickly realized that adverse childhood experiences weren't limited to acute personal experiences, but could also easily stem from underlying societal conditions in place long before a child is born.
I also believe that poverty is an adverse child experience. I believe that historical trauma is an adverse childhood experience. Intergenerational trauma is an adverse childhood experience. Institutional trauma is an adverse childhood experience. And that couples with people's personal traumas. So a lot of times when we're working with trauma, we're zeroing in on the personal traumas without all of this other stuff that may have preceded before the child even made it to the earth. And I think we have to kind of rethink what it is that we're doing when we're talking about advocating or entering in to helping people deal with trauma. We have to think about it not just as once people come on the planet.
Historical trauma are the generational experiences handed down, often silently, by those who survived horrific experiences as a community. For many African Americans, the legacy of slavery and segregation continues to traumatize. Native Americans are still haunted by the genocide of their people. The Holocaust remains an open wound for Jewish people around the world. Historical trauma still causes adverse childhood experiences, even for children who weren't alive when those events took place.
The reality that historical trauma, the experience of African Americans and Native American folks and Latino folks, how that over generations of time can impact them physiologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, how that has impacted their entire cultures. And so to raise that as this is a very real issue and we need to better understand this.
Trauma is not a poor man's disease, but poverty is one of those influential factors. The same way that white body supremacy is an influential factor, the same way that white supremacy and white body supremacy got organized and pushed through institutions is a factor in trauma. It is not destiny, it is a factor.
We have long talked about the social determinants of health, how much access people have to healthy foods, to social resources, to education, to employment, all of those things that feed into how a family functions, how a person experiences life. And those are much more difficult to address, but they're necessary.
It's that underlying day-to-day adverse event that we might not be attuned to.
We understand that there's just a continuum of experiences that people go through, and we want to back up that stream and say, how can we do better at those early stages so that people don't experience the negative outcomes in the future?
Minnesota has the highest rate nationally with disparities. And the best way to address the disparities that we feel is to be able to talk about ACEs, historical trauma.
St. Cloud, Minnesota is a small town turned metropolitan area. Its European immigrant roots have had to make room for new African roots as Somali refugees and African Americans arrived in search of peace and opportunity. People settled where they could afford to live and chose to be near their friends and family. This cluster of lower-income families had the unintended consequence of concentrating poverty, which had deleterious side effects on the children.
Talahi Elementary School, which is about 5 blocks away from here, was in the bottom 3% for performance in the state of Minnesota. And the demographics were shifting rapidly. There was a high poverty rate, which today sits at about 95% for the school. The culture, and race and culture shifted as well. And I think the numbers today are about 80% students of color.
I didn't know the extent of low-income families. If you don't want to know it's there, you ignore it, and it's very easy to ignore it.
If you looked at the issues in the community, you could trace ACEs back to probably 80% of them.
A lot of homelessness, hungry.
Chemical use, or having single parent households, some of them not even living with their families. They might be living with an aunt or a grandma. Those things are all contributing to trauma in some way, shape, or form for these kids.
Poverty is generational. We don't seem to have been able to figure out the chicken and the egg. Is it people living in poverty are destined to struggle in school, or are people who are struggling in school destined to live in poverty? But they do seem to go hand in hand. And especially in a medium-sized town that St. Cloud is, you can see the generational impact.
With test scores, it may be affected that they didn't have anywhere to sleep last night, or they have not ate breakfast this morning, or any type of factors. If this stuff continues to keep on happening, they're definitely going to be behind, and they're not going to have the same advantages as kids who have all of that stability in their life. And so it's really a life struggle. It's not just now and what's happening to them in elementary school, but what if they're 40 and because of all this stuff that's happening now, they're not able to be a productive member of society in some way, shape, or form.
When we are traumatized, we have something that happens to us. At the same time that that thing happens to us or our people, there's also something that should have happened that didn't happen, right? So I get smacked in the face with poverty. And what should have happened is that I had enough food to eat. right? And what should have happened is that I should have had somebody nurture me, right? Those things should have happened. So trauma happens in both those realms. And many of our approaches only deal with what happened, not what should have happened. What has affected people didn't just affect people individually, it affected communities. But our approaches are very individualistic. We have to get out of that box. We have to start actually beginning to figure out what are the communal approaches that we're going to help communities develop and reclaim so they don't turn it in on themselves.
The community experience of trauma affecting this St. Cloud neighborhood required a whole community solution, the Promise Neighborhood.
There's some amazing stuff going on in this community. The Promise Neighborhood is one of them.
For me, the importance of Promise Neighborhood, be a voice for the community and be able to help their children be successful in schools. If we're able to get to parents and parents are trusting them, you've made some big steps there.
The primary focus of Promise Neighborhood is to work with families and have families and community members identify issues, develop solutions, and then evaluate those solutions and make changes. The big thing is that community people are making decisions at this organization.
I was one of those families that needed some of the support that they do here with the back to school because I couldn't afford to get my kids the supplies, so I came, had a friend to bring me here, and my kids got to eat, got backpacks, everything in it. Once I seen it, I was like, wow, that's great. So I stayed here and I kept on coming to join more of the programs that they was doing. I liked it because I'm from Chicago, never seen anything like it in my life. So I stayed and I've been here almost 5 years now.
Out of the military, looking for something to be positive, to be a part of. In the community, I have a tattered background as well. So I was looking to make a difference, to help the kids out so they won't go down, the path as I've been to prison, to be a positive role model for the kids in the neighborhood.
They're empowering the parents to make those changes, and that's where it's at.
Our mentors and our volunteers and our tutors, all of it is one-on-one. So these kids are getting the one-on-one attention that they're not receiving in the classrooms, and many of them not even sometimes receiving at home.
I think they get out just feeling good, just helping a kid that they know that need that extra help. And I mean, if you can help a kid, why not be happy? I mean, why not? That's why I'm here. These kids make me happy every day. These children are my family, and I want to keep supporting them in every way that I can.
I enjoy more seeing the kids grow, learn, because they're gonna take that to their little brothers and sisters.
They know that they can come here, they're going to have all of these people who are consistently here, people that they're comfortable with, that they can talk to, that they can laugh with, that they can get a hug from.
They might not be comfortable opening up at home, or they might come here and just, like you say, be them. Come out their shell, and you might learn something about a child once they're able to just open up.
The kids get to trust, Sometimes kids don't trust adults for whatever the reason, and to come here and know that they can trust the adults that are here is awesome, and to see the kids come running in and want to do math again, that's awesome right there too.
When they go home, they're happy. When they come here, we're happy. We're like a big family with the kids.
And at the same time, we're providing them math skills, we're providing them reading skills, we're providing them life skills, build their confidence.
We have a girls group that we got going here with a lot of these young girls is having issues at home with their family. So we bring them all together and sit them down and talk about their issues.
Girls group is just focusing on some leadership, self-awareness, self-pride, and empowerment in girls and young women and what they can do and achieve. It's more than what they can become when they get older. It's what they have to go through right now.
A lot of these kids, I have seen them struggle so bad when I first started here. You couldn't imagine how awesome these kids are now from just being involved with Promise Neighborhood and the structure that we have for them. Because at home, they're not getting it. When we come here, we give them everything that they need.
Number one is it just builds their confidence and makes them feel important, and to be able to give them the positive encouragement that they're wanting.
The Promise Neighborhood, it's beautiful. I've never ever walked into a place and felt home. you know, and I felt at home.
I see a big change in the community because everybody see the work that we doing, and they come and get involved too because they see how much we love and how much support we put out for the kids. So everybody get involved. Everybody.
It's amazing. They have the right idea, and it is working.
Many Americans find comfort, safety, and compassion in faith communities like churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples. Faith leaders are beginning to wrestle with how to be a part of the solution to adverse childhood experiences by bringing the very best of their faith traditions.
The faith communities can be key to helping to continue to bring this forward and to find solutions breaking into the cycle.
Some of them, they don't like to share with you what happened to them. But in generally, we as an imam, we try to talk about this issue, like how you can heal from something that happened to you. The history, they are not the first people who go in these difficult things, but there are even other people who went this, process, and right now, their life is very important and very good and getting better.
St. Thomas Aquinas had a very strong sense of the body-soul unity, that we are a whole, and that things that happen to us in our relationships, things that happen to us spiritually, spills over into our physical health and experience, and the other way around as well.
The commandment, honor your father and mother, doesn't include the addendum unless they happen to be beating the hell out of you. And it's those kind of conflicts that actually we need to talk about more in the church. That's another reason to bring up and continue to make the unspeakable speakable. There's a sense of hurry up, get over it, move on, it's over. And so there's a lack of understanding that healing time takes time. A lot of people struggle in terms of shame, particularly in terms of what happened to them. There's a lot of messages in society that silence. There's a lot of messages in church that silence. We don't talk about this in church. We don't talk about this in families.
There's a difference between guilt and shame. And so shame is not helpful to people. Shame simply kind of holds them in a place that keeps them captive.
To recognize that, yes, indeed, these issues occur within faith communities as well. They're not void of experience within the faith community, clearly everywhere.
Part of the work that I've been doing is to encourage faith leaders, my colleagues, to explore any of the implicit or explicit messages or teachings that may actually reinforce the silence, the shame, and the generational cycle of trauma, to kind of take a good, honest look at that in light of the impact of trauma on the human person, and to ask themselves, am I helping or am I hurting? Am I helping to free people, or am I reinforcing shame and silence? And I think that's one of the most critical challenges for our faith communities right now, is to take a good, bold, fearless look at how we're doing church.
Not every problem is a spiritual problem. You have to have some awareness of the psychological and physical manifestations of people's struggles. At the same time, we don't want to bracket out the spiritual part of people's experience entirely. We are a whole, and all of those aspects of us need attention. We can't do that alone. We really need to have stronger partnerships across the community to understand and to address these things more holistically in a way that really brings healing and hope to people.
For the survivors of childhood trauma, the road toward healing can be long and difficult. But there is hope for wholeness. It begins with getting help.
So the way I found healing actually was through something called DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. And that's when I started realizing, I can take out these old wires and put in new ones. I don't have to be this broken mess that is hiding in a corner trying to commit suicide. I don't have to be that person. I can be somebody that someone can look up to, someone can be proud of, including myself.
One of the things that people say when they meet me, and then they find out just the sheer amount of trauma that I've had, there's an automatic, I feel sorry for you, type mentality that I get from people, or they, you know, kind of walk on eggshells, you know, like, oh, she's gonna be all freaked out, or so, you know, she's unpredictable. And I just want people to know that, like, it doesn't matter what you go through, it's about what you do afterwards. You know, it's about trying to make sure that whoever or whatever happened doesn't win and doesn't control what your life is going to be.
Am I completely healed? No. But am I completely broken? No. When a glass breaks, instead of throwing it away, they pour gold into it and it becomes something beautiful again. And so that's how I view myself and the women and children I work with, and that's how we view each other, is we're beautiful. Even with all our brokenness, we're beautiful.
I really hope that that if I do one thing in my entire life, is that I raised my children to not only love themselves, because I was not raised like that, but to, like, have empathy, you know, understand that there's other people that are going through things that maybe you don't know about, you know, and to try and help them if you can. Your trauma doesn't have to define you, and that you can be happy.
Whole People, Healing Communities is a TPT Partnerships co-production with CentraCare Health.